I got a new drum machine, the Donner Essential D1 Performance Beat Machine. I think Donner pleasantly surprised a lot of people with their B1 synth, so I was excited to check out their first foray into the drum machine space. I've been getting actually more and more into drum machines lately, and you know I love small, compact gear. So when Donner reached out and asked if I wanted to check this out and make a video, I thought it's a no-brainer. That being said, even though they're sponsoring today's video, they do not have control over the opinions that I will share, but I'm mostly gonna just try to show you a straight up walkthrough of this machine anyway, so you can decide if the workflow and the features are worth it for you. You don't need me to tell you if it's worth it for you, you can do that. I think after this video, you'll be able to judge for yourself. This unit is pretty lightweight, plastic build. I wouldn't necessarily say it feels cheap, but it doesn't necessarily feel extremely premium either. But I do think a lot of thought was put into the design. I do like this sort of sloped profile, which makes it a little easier on your neck when looking down at the machine on a desk or standing over it. We have stereo main out, 5-pin MIDI in, 5-pin MIDI out, and aux in, which functions more just like a through. Like you can just play sound through this drum machine. A headphone out, USB-C port, the power port, and the power switch there on the back. Let's plug this thing in and let me show you how it works. So the D1 is a sample-based drum machine. We have 12 slots, or 12 channels as they call it in the manual, that we can add different sounds to. So drum one-shots, or like instrument hits, longer samples even. And of course we can do the live finger drumming thing, but we can also create patterns with these sounds. We can program them with step sequencing, or we can play the sounds in live. A single beat can be 4 bars long, but you can chain beats together to create a song. We're gonna get into that structure and how that all works in a moment. So these are the preloaded dubstep sounds. Let's go ahead and load a different song with different sounds and different patterns. Let's try one of these drum and bass songs. Very, very cool. So every song is going to load up a new kit. We can also just individually choose a different kit. We could choose a house kit, for instance. But when I press play on this, we're still in the drum and bass song. That actually sounds pretty good, but it's playing the pattern from the drum and bass song. So it's a really interesting way of working. So we just changed the kit. We can also change the beat. So we can also go grab the house beat now, press play on that. And now we're still at the drum and bass tempo, but we're playing back the house pattern. So it's a quirky way of working that I'm going to get into in a little bit. Let's start from scratch though. I'm going to go into the beat menu and I'm going to scroll down until I find an empty beat slot. Let's just say beat 72. Now this is totally empty. If I press play, nothing's playing because nothing is programmed. We still have the house kit loaded up. So let's roll with that for a moment. We can start by step sequencing because that's going to be the easiest thing for us to do at the moment. So now that I've entered step sequencing mode, I can select what instrument I want to be step sequencing. Let's do the kick. And this is a 4-bar loop by default, but let's go ahead and change that by editing our beat. This screen really goes a long way in this being a desktop standalone drum machine unit. A lot of parameters in this beat edit, we're able to edit the length, so we can bring that down to 1 bar for now for the demo purposes. We can change the step velocity, like what velocity these steps will be programmed in as. And then we can also change the quantization, which is currently set to none. Obviously, when we're step sequencing, we're completely on the grid, but when we start to do some finger drumming, we may want to quantize or not. And when we do quantize, we can set the grid to which we want to quantize to. So quarter notes, eighth notes. I'll leave it on, how about eighth notes for now. So now that we have 1 bar, 4 to the floor kick, we notice we are at a very fast tempo, right? Let's go to our menu and let's change that tempo. We've got a tempo tap button right here where we can go in and adjust our tempo. So let's bring that down, something more housey, maybe 117, why not? And since I've already showed you the step sequencer, I'm going to shift sequence and get out of step sequencer mode. And we are just going to record in another instrument. For that, I'm going to go into record mode. I'm going to press play, count in, and that is automatically recorded in. That metronome is on while we're recording, but I can easily turn it off. I can get out of record mode and just listen back to our beat now. Audition some sounds. I think I played these pretty in time, but let's play something a little off for now. Kind of a weird little, almost triplety groove there. But my point is I want to show you that we can play in real time and it's not going to quantize automatically. So you can still get a human feel as you play. But if you do want to quantize your beat, you can do it in two ways. You can quantize everything all at once by just pressing the quantize button and quantizing all, or you can hold quantize and press the instrument or the pad that you want to quantize. So now we've quantized only the closed hat. And you remember earlier, we set the quantization grid to eighth notes, so it took what I played and did what it could with it. You'll obviously want to dial in that quantization grid depending on the type of things you're quantizing. But on the note of rhythm and feel, we also have a swing function. So if I hold shift and press swing, I can dial this in. It's at 50% now, which is essentially no swing, but we can bring that up and we'll get more of a swing to our beat. Everything won't sound so straight and on the grid. You've probably already noticed this, but we have 4 faders here, which we can switch the function of by going from bank A, B, or C. That corresponds to these pads, A, B, and C here on the grid, and the colors reflect and match as well. I think that's a nice touch. So at any point while we're listening to our beat, I can mix the different elements. Another way of quickly muting or soloing elements, we can hold mute and press the element we want to mute, like the kick here and the snare. Then we can drop them back in. And we can hold shift and solo to solo an element. So a couple different ways of approaching the mix here. If you were wondering about this bottom row of pads we haven't touched yet, they have a couple different functions. The first 2 here, they are a roll. So if we hold this down, we get a 16th note roll. If we hold the second pad down, 32nd note roll. And then if I revisit our beats, I'm going to go find a pre-made beat for this one in particular. Let's stick with house, and I'll find one of the pre-made house beats. If I press play on this pattern, and I press this fill pad on the next downbeat, we'll get 1 bar of fill. Same for this pad here. It's just another option. Another fill. And another fill. Those are pretty cool. They come pre-programmed with the different beats here, but we can also program our own fills once we start making beats. During the recording process, you might want to get rid of a part entirely. For that, we can hold clear part and press the part we want to get rid of. I've eliminated the kick from this beat. We can also clear all, which will delete everything in the beat. And we have to press and hold that, so nothing's going to accidentally, get deleted. But we do have an undo function here, so I can shift undo. And we were able to undo that clear. But we did only go back 1 step, and I wasn't able to undo the fact that I deleted the kick from this beat. By the way, I'm saying beat because that's the language that they use in the D1. You might recognize it more as a pattern. But even though I deleted that kick, it's not saved in this beat yet. I would have to save it to really commit that. If I reload the beat at another point, that kick would still be there because, again, we didn't save. So let's go ahead and choose another beat, and let's start to get into some of the parameters we can change about each of these sounds. Now you've seen that I've been using the value knob at the top here. I can use that for scrolling through menus, and it also has a click. And then we have 7 more. We have a few endless encoders, and then we have some potentiometers here. The one all the way on the right, that's simple. That's just our master volume. The next one over is our FX return, which we'll get into when we start talking about the effects, but that's going to be our overall level for the effects. And then here we have a panning knob, so I can take any of these sounds and pan them right or pan them left. And if you noticed, I'm able to control the panning for an individual sound by pressing that sound and dialing in the panning there, and that logic will follow us all the way through with all the other parameters. I should also note that if you wanted to select one of these pads without actually making a sound, you can hold Shift and select the pad. Shift, select the pad, and you're good to go. I'm skipping these two knobs for a moment, we'll come back to them, but here we have pitch and decay. So of course, as you can imagine, we can change the pitch of every sound, and we can also change the decay. Parameters 1 and 2 get really interesting because they can be different depending on the drum that we play. So here on kick, we have a low pass cutoff for parameter 1. Parameter 2, we have a distortion. But when I go to snare, we have a high pass cutoff on parameter 1, and we have a resonance. So if I combine that with the high pass cutoff, we can get a really resonant tone out of the snare. Now, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but for the hi-hat, the closed hat, and the clap, we get a really interesting parameter. Well, first of all, we get attack here. And then we get a really interesting parameter called humanize, and I love the graphic for this on the screen. We go from robotic to more human. And this is really cool because it is going to sort of randomize the velocity of the hi-hat in the sequence. So let's jump to a blank beat so I can just show that off. I will step sequence the hi-hat. Here we have a very basic hi-hat pattern. Very rigid, very on the grid, very same velocity every single time. If I hop out of the sequencer mode though, and I dial in this humanize, you can hear it start to vary greatly. If I combine that with swing, just so you all can get a taste of swing here. I thought that was a really thoughtful feature, and I think overall it's pretty thoughtful that each individual slot has parameters tailored to that specific instrument. Unfortunately though, there's no way to adjust that. So any sample that you load onto this closed hat slot will have attack and humanize no matter what. You can't change those two, and that goes for every single instrument slot here. The other ones that have a major difference are also the samples. So the samples, we get to be able to adjust the sample start and the sample end. And again, good use of the screen here, good graphic to represent what's actually happening, which is good for beginners who this machine is really targeted for. One really important feature in the step sequencer is the ability to parameter lock. So if I press and hold an active step, you will get a list of parameters that we can lock onto that single step. Things like the velocity, pitch, decay, the low pass cutoff, the distortion, those are those effect parameters that we have on kick specifically, the panning, and then we have substep, which allows us to put multiple hits onto a single step. You could use this for like exciting rolls and enter in a bunch of different hits on a single step, or you could use it to have notes be slightly off grid. I was slightly disappointed though to not see the reverb or delay sends in this parameter lock function. Also, you might be slightly worried, no copy paste button. What's up with that? You can essentially just save the beat as a new beat. You can take the old beat and save it as a new beat, and that's essentially the same thing as copying. Does that make sense? Okay, so as you've been following along, you might have noticed me using shift functions. Shift is usually enclosed in a rectangle, so anything you see enclosed in a rectangle here is a shift function, and that includes these two parameters here. So we have a double function on these two knobs, and we have reverb and delay. These are our send effects. So here, let's do snare. I can go ahead and hold shift, and we've selected the snare, crank the reverb. And now we are getting reverb on the snare. And then we have a delay. Let's crank that delay up. And I skipped this knob earlier. That is because that's just a general level of those effects altogether. So we're able to send each individual sample to our reverb and our delay. And we can adjust those effects by pressing Master Effects. Here we can go into reverb and we can change things like the filter on the reverb, the type of reverb. We have things like hall, church, plate, room. And then we can also adjust the decay and the tone. On the delay, we can adjust again the filter, we can adjust sync and turn that on or off, we can adjust the type of delay, the rate, and the feedback. Basically all the parameters you would like to adjust for a delay. Now there was one more thing we saw there, and it is called Master Effects, and there is only one true master effect, and that is the bus compressor. And in this menu, we are able to adjust the bus compressor, which is a compressor kind of on top of everything. So you can get a little bit of a distinct sound out of the D1 by adjusting this compressor, either making it more harsh or letting things breathe a little bit more. So all of the sounds run to their FX return, the reverb delay, and then that FX return runs into the bus compressor. Important to note that the aux in does not run through the bus compressor, it goes right out the master. So it is a proper through, it's not getting processed at all. All right, now let's talk about a few more slightly advanced features of the D1. First, let's quickly program another beat. I'll just do a 4 to the floor on the grid. And you may want to program a fill. They're a fun way to spice up a performance. So you've already seen me do the process for step sequencing and the process for recording in real time is that easy. Let's go ahead and quantize that in. Now, if we want to make a fill, it's just as easy. We hold record and we press fill A. Now we are in fill A. We're not recording into our proper beat or our proper pattern anymore. We're recording a fill. Okay, so I recorded that clap pattern as our fill A. I'm going to hold record and press fill A again. Now when I hit play again, it's going to play the proper beat. And then when I press fill A on the next downbeat, there we go. We have a little clap fill. Again. And that's done just by triggering fill A by tapping it once. You have 2 of those, fill A and fill B. So really easy to create your own fills. Now let's talk a little bit about the song structure. How are you going to go about making beats on the D1? How does this whole structure thing work? Well, to do that, let's actually dig into one of the sample songs here. Let's switch it up. Let's go Techno B. Very cool. All right. So the way this works is I just loaded the song Techno B1. This song contains 4 beats. This beat we're hearing here, the next one here, and the final and 4th one. Remember, each of these beats can be up to 4 bars long. A song saves the kit and the beat that you make within it. And you can have 4 of these beat slots as I just demonstrated in a song. What's cool about that is you can switch between those 4 beats on the fly. So here I am playing beat 4, which is actually represented by the 4 here on the screen. If I go ahead and hold beat and select 1, we transition to 1, 2, 3, and it will do it on the next downbeat. So you can quickly jump up between the 4 beat slots in a song. 4 is the max you can have in a single song, but I'm going to talk about why you can sort of like avoid that limitation a little bit, because basically I could access these 4 beats another way. I could go to the beat selection menu and I could manually select a new beat. And again, it will change on the downbeat. And I can even jump out of this song and choose a trance pattern. Now imagine you're not just going to use the factory songs, but you're going to use your own songs, your own kits, your own samples. So you could try to work around this song structure and have much longer songs, but there is a bit of a limitation to it, which I'll tell you about now. Remember how I mentioned songs hold 4 different beat slots? Well, one thing we can do in a song, if I go to the menu and go to beat slot, is we can chain these beat slots together to automatically play in sequence. So we can play through essentially a 16 bar beat and have that loop. Now, currently we were in manual mode, which meant I could switch manually between the beat slots. But if we set that to auto, it will play those beats in sequence. It will play the first beat slot. It's a 4 bar pattern, and now that's going to transition into beat slot 2. Now this is going to come up and transition beat slot 3, and so on. So that will loop automatically. So in song mode, your max for that is the 4 beat slots. But I can literally select any of these beats here. Let's select one of the drum and bass beats, and now this drum and bass beat is the 3rd beat slot. So after it's finished playing through this drum and bass pattern on the techno kit, it's going to transition back to a techno pattern. So we have the freedom to decide what beat goes into which beat slot. A little bit of a quirky workflow, but one that you can utilize to make longer songs and longer patterns. I want to also point out that in the menu, we are able to turn global BPM on so that no matter what beat I switch to, it's going to stay the same BPM. That doesn't have to be true. You could transition to another BPM if you wanted to. And there are other settings here in global that you can change, like clock source and the fader mode. That's something I changed right away to pickup a mode for the faders, meaning that I need to move the faders and match them to their on-screen position before they move. So if the fader was set like this on screen, but in real life it was set down here, me moving the fader doesn't result in a big jump in audio. It has to get picked up by me and then brought back down. There's pad sensitivity settings as well as curve, your MIDI in and out settings, as well as brightness for your screen, and a way to check your firmware version. Now you've got 4 gigabytes of internal memory in the D1, and the factory content is not bad at all. You've got things across different genres. And by the way, you can change individual samples in a kit by selecting that sample, pressing the value knob, and choosing between all your different kick options. So I could switch to, let's say, this kick that I imported myself. And I will say, these pads are not bad, but at the lightest velocity touch, you're not going to get much of a signal. You do need to apply what I would say is higher than the minimum amount of force needed on the most sensitive pad controllers. Now, I mentioned that I imported this sample, and that process is actually really easy on the Donner Control app on your computer. Essentially, you start by importing your samples into their individual category folders like bass drum, snare drum, etc. And then you can build your kits in the Essential D1 app too as well. So I like having that all in one place. You could also, of course, build the kit on the machine itself. One thing to note is that the individual types of instruments have different sample maximums. So some of the shorter sounds like a bass drum or a snare drum, those have a shorter max sample length, while the sample slots can actually give you nearly 60 seconds. I think it's like 59 or something like that of sample time there. But overall, the Donner Control app is simple, easy to use, and it's a relatively painless process for importing samples and making your own kit. Now, I do admire the simplicity of the Essential D1, but I feel as though there are some features missing. Number one, I was a little disappointed to see that I still need a power adapter for this unit and it's not USB powered. In addition to that, this USB port is only used for data transfer, so no audio over USB, which I think is becoming more and more industry standard, especially with a drum machine, because there's no individual outputs for singular drum instruments here. You get a headphone out and a main out. There's no way to say get the signal from your kick for a side chain, or to get full stems of your beat. And this thing is called a performance beat machine, but I'm not entirely sure it's living up to that name. It would have been nice to see motion recording added so that we could adjust effects on the fly and have those recorded in real time. Also, it would have been great to have some actual performance effects. Most of the effects that we have here for each individual sample slot, they have more to do with sound design, which is of course important for a drum machine. But in terms of performance, there's not a ton to tweak here besides, some reverb delay. I guess it would be fun to play with pitch and decay as you're going through, and of course your general volume mixing, but nothing that sparks too much creativity. Nothing compared to, of course, something like an SP404, which the D1 is definitely not trying to be, but if we think of that as sort of the gold standard for a sample-based performance instrument, I would have liked to seen some influence come in from that world. Another fundamental thing I wish we had, choke groups. I want that closed hi-hat to choke the open hi-hat, but no such luck here. So what do we think? In my mind, this device walks a fine line between keeping things super simple for beginners, but on the other hand, missing a few key ingredients. I'm very into gear that keeps things simple and doesn't overcomplicate the process, but I am slightly worried that if you did pick up a D1 and you started really getting down with working with drum machines and gear, you might quickly want to upgrade to something a little more robust. But maybe that stepping stone is worth it for some people, and if you had just started with something more robust, you wouldn't have gotten as far in your journey. I don't know, but I'm interested in hearing what you all think in the comments. Do you think it's better to start with a more complicated piece of gear and just grit your teeth and learn it? Or are these little kind of stepping stone simplified devices worth it for people getting their foot in the door and just dabbling, deciding whether or not they really want to go down the rabbit hole of making music with synths and drum machines? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks to Donner once again for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, and shout out to all my members for also supporting the channel. I'm telling y'all, I want to bring you as much informational content as possible, and the sponsors and the members make it so that I can sustain this channel and continue to do that, and your voice matters. So anything that you share with me in the comments, I will definitely read and take into account in trying to make this channel better. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.